Well, to talk about what is happening, happy to have on the program this evening Christian Leuprecht, of course, strategy expert, professor of political science at the Royal Military College, as well as Queen's University. Christian, always happy to have you with us. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, Michael.
So this attack happens, Iran retaliates. Israel says this is going to be a 14-day campaign, but could go longer, rather. What's the goal here? Because, you know, yes, it is to prevent Iran from developing a nuclear weapon, but can that really be accomplished in the time frame that Israel is quoting?
No. And Israel has already come out and said that it is not able to take out all of Iran's nuclear capacities. It, of course, can slow down the ability of Iran to develop its program, and ostensibly that's the purpose of the strike. But I think what's going on is actually something else. That we know that, of course, the U.S. and Iran have been negotiating an agreement, and we know that the outlines of that agreement look surprisingly similar to the agreement that the Trump administration tore up in 2018. So is Trump really going to go in front of the international media and announce an agreement that looks kind of like the one that he tore up? Or is this an opportunity sort of for Trump to force Iran into concessions and into real concessions that Iran has been unwilling to make? And from an Israeli perspective, Israel and Netanyahu in particular didn't want Iran and the U.S. to get an agreement, let alone something that's similar to 2018, because Israel at the time already felt that this agreement did not meet its objectives and its interests. So yes, it's Israel sort of doing the dirty work in return to lay the groundwork for Iran possibly to make some concessions. But of course, this is a massive gamble, and the possibilities for miscalculation are huge.
Yeah, and you know, and to what you just said, we know, for example, Donald Trump has already come out and said that Iran should take this opportunity to make a deal. We know as well that the United States knew that this strike was going to happen. But as you said, a great gamble here. What is the risk of this becoming a wider regional conflict?
Well, Israel itself is trying to control that risk. So if you look, it was very surgical at what and who it targeted. So it targeted the senior leadership of the nuclear program, and it targeted the senior military leadership. In particular, it targeted senior leadership of the Revolutionary Republican Guard Corps. Because it controls the elite units within the Iranian military, in particular those units who would be retaliating and planning that retaliation, but it also owns the nuclear program. And in addition to that, we know Israel targeted a senior meeting of Air Force commanders. So it really makes it much more difficult for Iran to retaliate. And of course, Israel took out a bunch of missile sites and air defense capabilities. But it left the political and the religious leadership intact. It appears not to have targeted a single person there. And so this is really a signal to Iran that you have an opportunity to make the right decision. And it's not that Israel would just be able to get Iran to sort of change course all of a sudden. But I think the challenge for Iran is really its own population, because if Iranians sense weakness in the regime, there's a high risk they'll go on the street and they might actually generate a revolution. And there's nothing that regimes that came to power through a revolution that fear more than their own people, because they know exactly what could happen. And so if the regime senses weakness domestically, I think to save itself existentially, it might be willing to sit down with the Americans and possibly cut some sort of a deal. And that might then be acceptable to Israel.
You know, I obviously the United States is Israel's strongest ally, but I'm wondering regionally, does Israel have any regional allies in this fight? Because, you know, as we talk about the gamble here, that has to be part of the calculation here, how other countries in the region might respond.
Well, I wouldn't go so far as saying ally, but I might say sympathizers. And of course, they're the same sympathizers that have been surprisingly quiet about Israel's conduct, including its conduct with regards to the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, that are the regimes that are now surprisingly quiet about Israel's attack on Iran. And that's, of course, all the Arab states in the neighborhood. because those Arab states have no love lost for Hamas and Hezbollah. And so Israel has effectively been doing their dirty work. And they, of course, have no love lost for Iran. And they sure don't want Iran to acquire a nuclear weapon or want to avoid it as much as Israel does, only they don't have the capabilities, intelligence-wise and military-wise, that Israel does. So there's certainly some sympathies within the region. And of course, there's also sympathies internationally because, of course, the same countries that only last week that came out and criticized Israel for its humanitarian conduct in Gaza, and then this week came out and sanctioned a couple of members of Netanyahu's cabinet, now all of a sudden find themselves lining up behind Israel and sort of tacitly saying, well, we sort of support Israel in its strike on Iran because, of course, nobody in the West has an interest in having sort of another North Korea on their hands when it comes to Iran acquiring nuclear weapons. So Israel certainly does have support. The question is, how long can it sustain that support? And of course, Netanyahu, being very Machiavellian, the Machiavellian politician that he is and the survivor that he is also using this occasion, of course, to distract from all the criticism and the humanitarian calamity and disaster that's going on in Gaza so that he can continue to pursue his political and military objectives in Gaza, but less under the gaze of the international community.
And as you say, a big gamble, as there are many parts to this whole story. But listen, Christian, always appreciate you walking us through and helping us understand it better than we do. Christian Leuprecht, thank you for the time this evening.
Thanks for the conversation, Michael.